Claire thought she had it all figured out. She thought she could keep her affair hidden, slipping in and out of late-night rendezvous, making secret calls in hushed tones. She was confident, convinced that I had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. And why wouldn't she? I had always been the calm, composed type, keeping my thoughts and feelings hidden beneath a well-constructed mask. To her, I was predictable, stable. She believed she had outsmarted me, but Claire didn't realize that I had been watching all along. I waited, I listened, I gathered everything, the late-night calls, the cryptic texts, the suspicious behavior. I didn't confront her. I didn't demand answers. No. I bided my time, quietly assembling the undeniable proof I needed to expose her for what she really was. It wasn't until I had every last detail locked in place, photos, texts, receipts, that I was ready to make my move. And so, when that night came, the night when she thought she was safe, I walked in on her. There she was, in her little world of lies, laughing and talking with him like they had no care in the world. The sight of it nearly made me sick to my stomach, but I stayed calm, maintaining the perfect mask of indifference. Claire's face drained of color as she saw me standing in the doorway, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. She froze, her smile faltering as she tried to process what was happening. But there was no mistaking it. I had caught her. And I wasn't just going to walk away this time. I didn't shout. I didn't throw accusations at her. Instead, I pulled out my phone, showing her the evidence. Photos, texts, the incriminating hotel receipt. The silence that followed was suffocating. She stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but the truth was right there in front of her. There was no escaping it. Surprised, I asked, my voice quiet but loaded with the satisfaction of knowing that the tables had finally turned. The weeks leading up to that moment felt like a slow burn. Claire thought she had me fooled, and that assumption only made me more determined. She'd become careless, the subtle signs of her affair growing more obvious with every passing day. Her phone never left her side, and when it did, she'd glance at it with a nervousness she'd never had before. The late nights, the unexplained absences, they all added up, but I remained silent, waiting. Each evening I would come home to her acting as if nothing was wrong. She'd greet me with a smile, ask about my day, and make small talk over dinner. To anyone else it would have seemed normal, but to me it was all part of the game she was playing. I knew her too well. We had been together for over a decade after all. I could read her like an open book. Her eyes would dart away when I asked certain questions, and her voice would rise an octave when she was hiding something. It was always the little things that gave her away, and yet I never confronted her. Never once did I accuse her or question her motives. I wasn't going to be the fool who acted on suspicion. No, I was playing the long game. I'd learned long ago that when you want to catch someone in a lie, you wait until you have the full story, the proof you can't deny. That's how you ensure there's no escape. Claire would think she had outsmarted me, that she could keep everything hidden in plain sight, and when the time was right, I would expose her. I hired a private investigator, a man named Jack. He wasn't cheap, but I needed someone who could follow her without being detected, someone who could gather the evidence I needed. Jack was thorough, more than I had expected. He kept me informed with text messages, emails, and reports, and soon enough I had everything. The texts between Claire and her lover were filled with details, from their secret meetings to their planning for weekend getaways. Each piece of evidence was more damning than the last, but it wasn't enough to have texts. I needed more. I needed photos, proof that would be irrefutable. I didn't want to give Claire any wiggle room, any chance to deny what was happening. So Jack followed her one evening when she slipped away after work. He sent me photos of her entering a hotel with the man she had been seeing behind my back. I stared at the images on my phone, her, smiling as she walked into the hotel lobby, her lover's hand on her back. The betrayal was all but written in those pictures, clear for anyone to see. I felt a sick satisfaction in knowing I had all the ammunition I needed. Still, I waited. There was no rush. Claire thought she could keep playing her little game, but I knew she was getting sloppy. One evening, she didn't even try to hide her phone when it buzzed in the middle of dinner. The name that flashed across the screen was one I had never seen before. It was a name that, if I had confronted her then and there, might have given her a chance to come up with some excuse. I didn't want to give her that opportunity. I simply made a mental note of the name, knowing it would be yet another piece of the puzzle. But the most satisfying moment came a few days later. Claire had taken a day off work, another one of those spontaneous self-care days she called them. I didn't question it, of course. She had grown more unpredictable as of late, and I was too focused on the bigger picture to care about her excuses. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I received an email from Jack. Pictures of Claire and her lover entering a restaurant in the city. They were holding hands, their smiles wide and carefree. It was another piece of the puzzle, another moment that made her believe she was untouchable. When I had enough, when I knew there was no turning back, I made my move. I could have confronted her sooner, but I needed everything to be perfect. I needed her to be so certain of her victory, so confident that she was getting away with it, that the moment I exposed her would be all the more devastating. That evening when she came home, I was waiting for her. I didn't say anything at first. I just let her walk through the door, greeted her with a kiss on the cheek, and let her settle into the couch like nothing was wrong. It was only when she started talking about her day that I showed her the photos. I placed them on the coffee table, one by one, letting the silence between us grow heavier with each image. She looked at the pictures, her eyes scanning them in disbelief, but there was no denying it. She tried to speak, her words tumbling over each other, but she couldn't find a way to explain away the evidence. For the first time, I saw her panic. It was a look I had never seen before. The confident, composed woman who had once thought she could get away with anything was now trembling, her mask slipping away as she realized the truth was out. Surprised, I asked, my voice quiet but cutting. Her world began to unravel right before her eyes, and I didn't need to say another word. The proof was in front of her, and there was no running from it. The silence hung heavy in the room as Claire continued to stare at the photos on the table. Her breath quickened, her hands trembling, and for the first time in years, I saw her completely exposed. The confident, manipulative woman who had thought she could play me was now on the verge of breaking down, realizing she had no way out. She tried to speak, her words stumbling over each other, but nothing came out clearly. It was as if her mind was racing, scrambling to find an excuse that would make the undeniable truth disappear. But there was no escape, no clever excuse she could spin. "How long has this been going on?" I asked quietly, my voice steady, calm, even as her world collapsed around her. It was the one question I knew I needed an answer to, though I already knew the truth. I had known for months, maybe even longer, but this moment wasn't for her. It wasn't even about her anymore. This was about me, about the years of patience, the careful orchestration of my plan, and the sense of vindication that came with knowing I had been right all along. Claire opened her mouth as if to answer, but nothing came out at first. She closed her eyes, then looked back at me, her gaze finally meeting mine for the first time in what felt like ages. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." It was as if her words were meant to soften the blow, to make the betrayal seem less cruel, but I wasn't fooled. I had heard that line before, from other people who tried to justify their actions. The excuses always followed the same pattern. It wasn't my fault. I wasn't the one to blame. The truth was far simpler and far more damning than any of those tired excuses. Claire had made a choice, and she had lived with the consequences of that choice for far too long. I didn't answer her immediately. I wanted her to feel the weight of the truth, to understand that there was no going back from this. Her affair, her lies, the way she had spun her world into a web of deception, it was all coming crashing down now, and she couldn't stop it. "How long?" I repeated, this time with a bite to my words. I wasn't going to let her off the hook with soft words or weak explanations. I needed her to face what she had done, to see the mess she had created with her own hands. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting from the photos back to me. "It's been a few months," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I was just so lost. I didn't know how to get out of the rut we were in, I thought." She trailed off, her gaze faltering as if she couldn't bear to say the words out loud. She didn't have to. I already knew what she thought. She thought she could get away with it. She thought she could keep her marriage intact while pursuing whatever selfish desire she had on the side. She thought she could deceive me, play me for a fool. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't the one being fooled. I had known, I had seen the signs, and I had been waiting for this moment to come. "You thought what?" I asked, my tone turning icy. You thought you could have it all, Claire? You could have me, your family, and still sneak around with him like nothing mattered? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The tears started to well up in her eyes, and I could see her face crumple with the realization that there was nothing left to say. The damage was done. There was no taking it back. She had betrayed me, and now she had to face the consequences. I watched her break down in front of me, but there was no pity in my heart. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. This wasn't the person I had married. This was a stranger. Someone who had chosen to deceive, to destroy, all for the sake of some fleeting pleasure. I had waited for this moment, and now that it was here, I felt nothing but a strange sense of clarity. Please, Ethan, she begged, her voice desperate now. Please, don't do this. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Can't we fix this? Can't we start over? I looked at her with cold eyes, unblinking, refusing to show any sign of weakness. Fix this, I repeated, almost in disbelief. You can't fix betrayal, Claire. You can't fix the years of lies and deceit. You can't fix what's already been broken. She tried to reach out to me, her hands trembling as she grasped for anything that might make me reconsider. I'll do anything. I'll end it with him, I swear. Just give me a chance, please. Don't throw us away. Her words were nothing more than empty promises. There was no redemption for what she had done. The damage was irreversible, and in that moment I realized something deep down. I didn't need her to fix anything. She wasn't the woman I had thought she was, and I didn't want someone who could hurt me so deeply. Go ahead, I said quietly, standing up from the chair. Call him. End it. But you and I? We're done. She looked at me, stunned, as if she hadn't expected that. But I was done with the lies, done with pretending. I had been patient for far too long. It was time for me to move on, to let her face the consequences of her actions. Her tears continued to fall as she sat there, broken, and for a fleeting moment I almost felt sorry for her, but that feeling quickly passed. There was no room for sympathy here. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her behind. She wasn't the person I had married anymore, and as I stepped into the hallway, I realized that I was finally free. Free from the lies, free from the betrayal, and free to move on. The days following that night were a blur of tension and finality. I had done it. I had exposed Claire for the woman she truly was, and now she had to live with the reality of what she had done. I thought that maybe, just maybe, her reaction would change over time, that I might hear from her again with an apology, a plea to fix things, to salvage whatever was left of our marriage. But I never expected it to happen the way it did. I had barely had time to process the weight of what had just unfolded when the doorbell rang one afternoon. I didn't even have to look through the peephole to know who it was. Her frantic knock echoed in the quiet house, and I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me as I stood in the entryway, knowing that I had already made my decision. Claire had finally reached out, but this time, it wasn't to confront me. It was to beg. When I opened the door, there she was, standing before me. Her hair was messier than usual, her eyes red and swollen from crying. It was almost as if the woman who had once been so confident, so sure of herself, had completely disappeared. The mask she had worn for so long had finally cracked, and all that was left was a woman who was broken, vulnerable, and terrified. Ethan, please, she said, her voice trembling. Can we just talk? I need to explain everything. I need you to understand. I stood there not saying a word, watching her as she struggled to find the right words. Her desperation was clear, but it did nothing to move me. I wasn't angry anymore. There was no rage in me, no desire for confrontation. The truth had already come to light, and the betrayal had cut deeper than I ever thought possible. What she wanted now was irrelevant. It was too late. You had your chance to explain, Claire, I said quietly, my voice steady, unaffected. You had months to tell me the truth, to come clean before I found out on my own. But you chose to lie. You chose to deceive me. Now, there's nothing left to say. Her face twisted in anguish as she reached for my hand, her fingers brushing against my skin in a desperate plea. Please, Ethan. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just so confused, so lost. You don't know what it felt like to be in my shoes. I never wanted to hurt you, never wanted this. I swear to God." Her words echoed in the hallway, but they felt hollow. I couldn't shake the image of her and him, the way they had looked at each other with that false sense of entitlement, as if their actions didn't matter. I couldn't forget the evidence, the photos that had exposed everything for what it was. Claire thought she could get away with it, but the truth had already shattered whatever illusion she had left. "Don't touch me," I said firmly, pulling my hand away from hers. "I don't need your apology. I don't need your excuses. You've made your choices, Claire. Now, I'm making mine." She stepped back, her eyes filling with tears again. "Please," she whispered, almost pleading, "can we fix this? Can't we just start over? I'll do anything, I swear. I love you. I want to be with you. Please, don't let this destroy us." I stood there, watching her crumble before me, and for a fleeting moment, I thought about the life we had shared, the good times, the moments of happiness. But then I remembered everything. I remembered the lies, the deception, and the shattered trust that had broken us. The woman standing before me was no longer the woman I had married. She had become someone else, someone I didn't know, someone I didn't recognize. And as much as it pained me, I knew in my heart that I couldn't go back. I couldn't forgive her. "You had your chance, Claire," I said, my voice colder now. "This isn't something that can be fixed. Not now. Not after everything that's happened." Her sobs filled the air, but I didn't move. I had nothing left to give. There was no more forgiveness in me, no more compassion. The woman who had once been my partner, my equal, was now just a stranger standing in front of me, begging for something that was no longer mine to offer. "Please, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please don't leave me like this. You don't understand. I made a mistake. I was weak. I thought I could handle it. But I can't live without you." I shook my head slowly. "No, Claire. You chose this path, and now you have to walk it." With that, I turned and walked away from her, leaving her standing there in the hallway, her sobs echoing behind me. There was no turning back. There was no more room for her in my life. As I entered the living room, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. This was the end. The chapter had closed, and there was no reopening it. In the days that followed, Claire tried again, through texts, phone calls, and even showing up unannounced. Each time, I shut her out. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. She was no longer a part of my life, and I was done. The hardest part wasn't the confrontation, though. It was realizing how far we had both drifted from the people we had once been. But I knew deep down that it was the only way to move forward. She had broken me once, but now I was free. Free from the lies, free from the betrayal, free to rebuild my life, piece by piece. And I would. The future was waiting, and I was done looking back. As the weeks went by, I found myself navigating the aftermath of everything that had unfolded. Claire's presence in my life had been a constant for so long, and now that she was gone, I felt a strange emptiness, but also a quiet peace that I hadn't realized I had been craving. I had been living in a fog for so long, bound by the ties of a marriage that had only been held together by lies, that when the truth finally came out, it was as though a weight had been lifted off my shoulder. But Claire wasn't giving up that easily. She kept reaching out, first through texts, then through phone calls. At first I didn't respond, letting her words float into the air like they meant nothing, as they truly did. I had already made my decision. I had already seen through the charade. But she didn't seem to understand. She seemed to think that if she kept pushing, if she kept apologizing, I would somehow cave and come back to her. She came to the house one afternoon, her face streaked with tears, her eyes pleading. I stood by the door, arms crossed, watching her as she tried to explain herself one last time. This time, there was no rage in her voice, no desperate attempts to justify her actions. It was raw, almost fragile, as if she had finally understood the finality of what had happened between us. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've destroyed us, Ethan. I didn't mean for any of this. I never thought you'd find out like this." I didn't answer right away. The silence hung between us like a thick fog. What could I possibly say? There were no words that would change what had happened, no apologies that could take away the sting of the betrayal. Her actions had spoken louder than anything she could ever say now. I had given her more chances than I should have, but I had reached my limit. You destroyed more than just us, Claire, I said, my voice steady. You destroyed my trust, and that's something that can never be rebuilt. She looked at me, her face crumpling as if the words had physically struck her. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then she closed it, her shoulders sagging with the weight of everything that had come crashing down on her. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quietly. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for everything. There it was, the final apology, the last effort to fix what was beyond repair. But I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need anything from her. I had already let go, already moved past the version of myself who had been blindly committed to saving a marriage that had never really been mine to save. She had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. I don't need you to be sorry, Claire, I said, my voice colder now. I need you to understand that I'm done. I'm done with the lies, done with the deception. You've had your chance. Her tears flowed freely now, and I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, but it was too little, too late. I had already walked away from the idea of a future with her. The woman who stood before me wasn't the woman I had married. She was a stranger. Someone I had never truly known, despite everything we had shared. I've been patient, Claire, I continued, my gaze hardening as I spoke. I waited for you to come to your senses, to come clean. But you never did. You kept me in the dark, and now there's no more room for you in my life. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand to stop her. There was nothing left to say. The truth was laid out for both of us, and there was no going back. You made your bed, Claire. Now you have to lie in it. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw her truly broken, truly lost. I felt no joy in her misery, no satisfaction in seeing her this way. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite name, that had begun to settle in my chest. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It was freedom. The shackles of our marriage had been broken, and with that came the ability to breathe again. I could finally exhale. Goodbye, Claire, I said, turning away from the doorway, leaving her standing there in the hall. Alone. As the days passed, I focused on myself, on rebuilding my life from the ground up. The process wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of the past would come crashing back, when I would catch myself thinking about what we had lost. But the truth was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, reminding me of why it had ended, reminding me that I was better off alone than living a lie. I took up old hobbies, things I had once loved but had abandoned in the chaos of our failing marriage. I spent more time with friends, reconnecting with people I had pushed away during the years of pretending everything was fine. Slowly, I started to rediscover who I was, who I had been before Claire and I had fallen into the web of deceit. And then one day, out of nowhere, I felt it, the absence of the weight that had once anchored me. I didn't think about Claire anymore. I didn't look back at the life we had shared with regret. The past was the past, and there was nothing more to be done. The future was wide open, and for the first time in years, I looked forward to what was ahead. I realized that sometimes the best revenge wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a long-winded speech. It was simply walking away, taking back my life, and moving forward with the peace I had long since earned.